Hey, welcome back to our Bible study Journey with Jesus, where we're going through the Bible chronologically in a year using Tara Lee Cobble's The Bible Recap Study Plan. Today is day 29, and we are on chapters in Genesis 48 through 50. We will have read the entire book of Genesis today. It has been one of my favorite times ever going through Genesis. I feel like I have learned so much. I've only read the entire Bible twice or once. This will be my second time. But I feel like I've read Genesis probably like most of you umpteen thousand times. Like every time I've ever tried to read the Bible, I start in Genesis. And then I would never make it through. Or I would make it to Exodus and then Leviticus would be hard. Anyway, what I'm saying is all the times that I've ever read Genesis, this is my favorite. I have learned so much. And so especially in these last 3 chapters, I want to share. In chapter 48, we see Jacob blessing Joseph's 2 eldest sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And of course, you know, this goes against all of the laws of primogeniture where the oldest son is supposed to get the double portion of the blessing. Obviously, to continue with God's pattern, Jacob is like, no, I know that Manasseh is the eldest. However, Ephraim is going to be greater than his brother. And we see that in verse 19. What I wanted to highlight in chapter 48 is the fact that in verse 5, and it says, "Now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are mine." Jacob adopted them as his sons. What's really interesting about this that I never really considered before is the fact that these boys were half Egyptian. Their mother was an Egyptian. And so we see here that kind of the first hint of God grafting everybody, all the nations, all the people into his family. I mean, these kids were half Egyptian and they got tribes. They were included in the 12 tribes of Israel. And that was such an amazing thing to me. And it was such a foreshadowing of how God adopted the Gentiles into his family. And unless you are of Jewish heritage, you are among those people. You are a Gentile. And this is just the most beautiful thing that I have probably seen in this entire book is the fact that Jacob adopting 2 half Egyptian sons and bestowing a blessing on them is absolutely amazing to me. And then we get into chapter 49. You may hear geese in the background. We have a pond and there are probably 15 geese out there fighting over territory. So it's been kind of loud today. But what we see in chapter 49 is Jacob begins to give out the blessings to his sons. And we see him beginning with the sons of Leah. And we'll kind of see, yes, she had the 4 eldest sons, but we see her jumping we see him jumping to the rest of Leah's sons after he's done with Judah. So what we know about Reuben is the fact that he slept with Bilhah. I think it was Bilhah. And we know that there wasn't much mentioned about that in the previous. It was like one little verse about it, but we're seeing the consequences of his actions here. But with Reuben sleeping with Bilhah, it was more than just a sexual sin. It was him saying to his father that he did not respect his authority. And it was almost like he was trying to claim leadership at that time. And with Jacob telling Reuben in verse 4 that he's unstable as water, that means like water, like I'm thinking about sea, right? The sea is like chaos. That's what it represents in the Bible. And with him saying that he's unstable as water, it's meaning that he wasn't stable and he was impulsive. And so he could not trust him to be the leader of his family. And so he takes away, my Bible calls it preeminence. And I Googled that just to make sure and kind of understand what that meant. But that means the highest rank, right? As the eldest son, he was the highest ranking one. And so with him saying that he shall not have preeminence, he's taken away that rank. He's taken away that right of the firstborn. And the rights of the firstborn were like spiritual and social. He would have been the spiritual and social leader of his family. Well, with Jacob taking that away, he dispersed that to 3 different tribes. And so we see the blessing that would be associated with being the highest ranking brother. He already gave that to Ephraim and Manasseh. But that would have been for Joseph. The priesthood, so like the eldest was responsible for a priesthood type role. We see that given to Levi. And then the social leader, or the ruling authority, would have been given to Judah. And so we'll see that play out. But I thought that was a very interesting thing while I was doing some research. And so we further see that we saw that happen to Reuben, and then we see him speaking to Simeon and Levi. And obviously, we know Simeon and Levi did the horrible thing in Shechem to the Shechemites, and they did it out of anger. And that is where they went wrong. Obviously, what they did was wrong, but it was out of anger. That was the motivating factor. It wasn't even really for justice as much as it was out of anger, and we see that here. One thing, I wanted to look up what this meant, but my Bible says hamstrung oxen. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. So I was like, what does this mean? So in my research, I found that when they hamstrung an oxen back then, they would cut the tendons of the hind legs, making the ox useless and like useless to work, but also made the animal suffer. Like there was so much suffering there, and it was such a useless act. And so what Jacob is saying here is that what they did was excessive. You know, even if they would have just killed them, it wouldn't have been nearly as bad as the way that they went about it. And as I mentioned in a previous video, they used the covenant that God set up with them, the example of the covenant, to do that. And it was kind of like spitting in his face. And so we move on to Judah, and which would be brother number 4. And we see that it's talking about the lion's cub, Lion of Judah. We see that referenced in Revelation 5:5. Revelation 5:5. We see the word scepter. We see that all shall obey him, and all these different things are alluding to being king. We even see it says until tribute comes to him. That is the foreshadowing of Jesus. They call it Shiloh, and that's also something that was referenced to Jesus or the Messiah. And then we move to verse, I'm sorry, I'm coming down with some, verse 13, where he addresses Zebulun, and then he addresses Issachar. And so this would be the last of Leah's sons. So he is speaking he spoke to all of Leah's sons, and I thought that was really, really an interesting thing. And then he goes to Zilpah and Bilhah's children, and he addresses Bilhah's oldest, and then Zilpah's oldest, and then Zilpah's youngest and Bilhah's oldest. And I just thought that was interesting, the way that the order that he went in when he did that. And we see all of these things are, and then he addresses Joseph and Benjamin. And what's pretty amazing about this is Joseph's not only giving his sons blessings, but he's prophesying over them in this. And it's not just them, but it's the tribes that they will become. So like he's speaking directly to the sons, but he is speaking prophecy over the tribes that they will become. And think that that's so amazing that God would reveal those things to him. And then we see Jacob die, and it says all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And one of the commentaries spoke about the fact that 12 sons went into Egypt, but 12 tribes come out. And that just shows, one, the growth, like we talked about in our last video, that 70 of them went in, and like 600,000 to several million of them came out. And that's just in those 400 years how much they progressed. And then we see in verse 31, there they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife. And there I buried Leah. We finally see some dignity given to Leah. The fact that she is laid to rest by Jacob, or Jacob is laid to rest by her. We actually finally get to see some dignity restored to her. Let's see. In chapter 50, we see Jacob, in God's providence and his sovereignty, we see Jacob dying in the best place that his body would have been able to be preserved, so that his body could make it back to Canaan. Like if he would have died anywhere else other than Canaan, he wouldn't have been as well preserved as Egypt was able to do. They were so advanced in all of their different ways. They embalmed him, and that way that he could make it back, the trip back, because in Jewish culture, they bury their dead within 24 hours. And so with him being embalmed, and it taken 40 days, numbers are such a huge thing. We see it taken 40 days, and then they wept for him for 70 days. And it's just to see how into the details God is amazing to me. Let's see what else so Joseph, we see his brothers are worried that now that Jacob's dead, like they're gonna repay, Joseph is going to repay them for justice, right? They knew that they were wrong. They knew what they did was wrong, and they were so scared they didn't want to go to him themselves. And so they sent a messenger to him. When Joseph heard about it, he wept. And they knelt down before him. But he says to them, but Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? And the fact that he was kind of like, who am I to give you this judgment? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about so that many people should be kept alive as they are today. A lot of times we stop as you meant for evil. What you meant for evil, God meant for good, or my good. But this wasn't, God didn't mean this for his good. He meant it for the good of everybody around him. He was able to help them during the famine. He was able to bring them out of a potentially harmful situation, bring them to Egypt. Because in Canaan, we see that Judah married a Canaanite woman. Like all of these things God was trying to preserve his people. That was part of it. And he took them out of Canaan and brought them into Egypt. Now they suffered in Egypt, but their line was kept pure, because we see as they got into, after the wilderness, they got into Canaan. Spoiler alert, they still married Canaanite women. So anyway, there's so much that I could go into. I just do not have time. I may do a separate video on Joseph. I actually will. And just how amazing it is that he is such a Christ type, and really what even this passage in and of itself really means and points to Jesus in. Anyway, I would love to hear something that stood out to you in Genesis. I'm going to do another video of kind of a synopsis, a summary of of Genesis. And I've so enjoyed it, and I can't wait. Hopefully you all will let me know what you think and what kind of stood out to you. And next we will go over Exodus. So I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good day.